Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Today was day 5 in Iceland and it was a very packed day. This was probably the fastest paced day that we've had yet, simply because it was our sightseeing day outside of the ranch. The person who was responsible for our reservations ended up booking an itinerary for what was called the Woolen Circle. So we were able to stop by several yarn related shops. We've been knitting all week, but we haven't actually been going to any yarn related things, but we have been interacting with the horses. So today was a nice way for us to actually interact with other Icelanders and their yarn practices. I got up on time for breakfast. We were planning to leave right at 9. That meant we had about half the time that we usually do for breakfast, but 2 hours is a long time for breakfast. And I was getting up at 8 o'clock anyway. The breakfast is the same that it's been the past several days, which was good. Ate enough to make sure that we had enough, and everyone got up in time and we all made it out. Although I had the misfortune of discovering that my body relaxed too much and my period started this morning. I was not happy about that. I have brought period supplies with me, but I would have preferred not to have had it at all, at least until I got home. Especially since I started about 2 days before I went home means that airplane day is going to be a heavy day, and that's not going to be. But I'm just thankful I had the supplies. But we got on the bus, and part of the reason why we got such an early start was we had a bit of a ride to get there. We had an hour, 40-minute ride. The van was a different one than the one that we rode before. Instead of the tacky 90s artwork on the chairs, we were in leather seats, and there was a Mercedes symbol. There were like blue lights lighting up the truck as we went in, and on the front of the truck had a clock. But the clock always started at 0 when the car started, so you knew exactly how long you'd been driving if you ever looked at it. In one way, it'd be annoying because it's like, oh, I've been sitting here for 40 minutes? How long? But also, it was handy because we were told it would take an hour and a half to get here. And well, it's been about an hour and a half, so we must be close. The seats were a little bit tighter today, but I got into the seat and I started knitting. I had a knitting project with me. Our first stop today was at a dye studio. So there's this lady who got her master's degree in plant dyes, and she studied a lot about how people dyed yarn and fabric and things like that. She has a studio that is also her house, and she dyes yarn there. She has commercial yarn, but we went in there and there were several dye pots going, and we could actually see the stuff that was going on in the dye pots. She had red onions, lupins, those purple flowers that are everywhere in Iceland. She had a pot of madder going on. She had a pot of lichen going on. She had this deep, rich brown. She had a pot of spruce pine cones, maybe. It was a nice brown, but it was also a nice color. And there's also a couple pots with yarn in it. So some of it had the natural material and the other parts had the yarn. And there was a lot of information. It turns out that anything that is green plant-wise will turn to yellow. So if you want to actually get green, you have to over-dye the yellow with indigo. Iceland has about 500 native species, so they can't actually get all their colors. So some of the other colors, like red and blue, came from overseas, and the Viking blue was woad blue, but woad blue was replaced by indigo, which came from India because the concentration was higher and you could use less dye to get more blue. There's also a bunch of colors you can get from mushrooms. They have a plant that can give them red naturally, but that root for that plant is only about that big, and the other one is the cochineal bugs, but that doesn't give a lot of dye either. Madder root ended up getting imported to Iceland, and that's how they get a lot of their red now, which is how they get red in America. The person who runs the shop, she dyes the yarn close to how people did it in the past, but she uses modern amenities to make her life easier when it's needed. In the past, how people got the dye stuck on was old urine. Apparently urine has to be collected and then It sits for several weeks before you're able to use it for dyeing, and it was a lot easier to collect urine in the older times because animals were stuck in the barns. They weren't free range, so you could actually just collect the urine from the cow. And today I learned that if you tickle a cow in particular spots, you make them pee, which people figured out because it turns out if you milk a cow and then they start peeing while you're milking them, you're going to get splashed. So in order to prevent getting splashed and to collect the urine, they figured out this process, which is pretty smart on their part. But urine smells bad. So the lady who runs the shop actually found an ammonia. She mentioned to me where to get the ammonia. It's something related to animals, but I don't quite remember, but it's nice that that exists. She said the ammonia smell is pretty strong and it doesn't smell good, but unlike urine, the smell dissipates quickly. And then there's some color changes that happen as well. Since rhubarb is pretty plentiful here, sometimes her neighbors that grow rhubarb actually give her the extra rhubarb roots that helps give the color. But rhubarb boils down to a yellow color, but then they put this chemical in it. I forget what the chemical is, but you dip the yellow yarn in and it changes the rhubarb. For the rhubarb, when she originally dyes, the yarn is dyed yellow from the rhubarb, but she puts it in the solution with the chemical changing and it changes it to pink. So it's very nice to have that color. Yellow is probably the easiest color for her to do, but most people don't really like yellow. And she pointed out, none of us were wearing yellow. She mentioned that she uses indigo a lot to give greens because people really do like green. There's also a color hierarchy with what dyes various classes of people could use, because like the church could get purples and then kings could get blues because those dyes were harder to get. If you didn't have any money, you didn't get any colors, like everyone else got what was left. Slaves had undyed clothing, so they figured out how to get very nice browns. And especially during the Dark Ages, part of it was Iceland lost contact with the outside world, so they had to depend on themselves for several things. They had to figure out the colors of themselves. There are new plants here now, and the lady who runs the shop did say that Iceland has to develop new traditions for dyeing to experiment with the colors that we have now. There was a black that they have, I forget the name of the flower now, but they've actually figured out how to get black yarn, which it's very hard to get black in the natural world. At least plant-based. It was impressive that they figured it out because black is a pretty popular color. She also told us where she finds her lichen, because even though her lichen's in a secret spot, she said that we would be unable to pronounce it and therefore the secret is still safe. She did say what it was and I don't remember what it was. So yeah, it's still safe on this end. She set a timer to talk and she talked for several minutes, and yet copper was something that she uses to change the color of the dye, because some dyes work better when it's in a copper pot, but copper pots are a little bit more expensive, so she just puts like a copper piece in there. It actually works the same way, so she had several things of copper and she had all sorts of samples, and she set a timer to talk and just to make sure that she kept to her time limit. After we heard the talk, we got to walk around the shop and we could buy several of the yarn. She had all sorts of yarn that she dyed around. And she also had books. She explained books that she had for different dye projects. And there were things that were on display that were not on sale. She had a whole collection of crochet doilies that were absolutely stunning. She had different tools along the wall. She had spinning wheels all around. There was also the added benefit of the fact that she had a dog. The dog's name was like Trigger, I think. It sounds very similar to the English word trigger, but it's an Icelandic word, means that he's very loyal. But the dog is on a leash because he is very loyal until someone offers him food, and then he goes to where the food is. So the leash is to make sure he's not going too far away. And he came in and obviously we took turns petting him. I gave him a belly rub several times because he happened to leave the belly open for rubbing after the initial pet on that. There was also another employee there, and she was putting together the boxes for kits, which honestly looked like a nice peaceful job. She said it was a pretty easy job to do, and the lady who runs the shop is lucky. As we left, the dog decided to poop outside, and one of us accidentally stepped in the poop and carried it into the van. It was not me because I actually saw the dog doing it and knew to avoid it. After that, we went on to our next stop, which was lunch. We went to lunch at a Viking restaurant, and the building was unlike most buildings I've seen. I may have seen a building like this somewhere else, but if I did, I don't remember it. The entire thing was covered in grass. It was like, whoa, this is impressive. And when we went in, it had the whole Viking vibe. It looked like a hall with skins all over the walls and different shields with different crests on them. There was like an alcohol drink list nearby, and we looked at it, and it turns out they served mead. Typically, I don't drink unless I'm not driving or I'm close to my bed. And even though I wasn't really close to my bed and knew I was risking a headache, I was like, we're eating like Vikings, yeah. They probably would have drank mead. Let's do it. The mead was flavored. There's like options of blueberry and cherry mead, and I did ask for the blueberry, but the blueberry was not available, so I said cherry was fine. And when they brought the mead to us, the mead was in a horn, like a hollowed out horn. It was so smooth, and it was just a nice place sensationally, because there was a skin on the table, so I got to pet the skin. We think it may have been a seal, and it was super soft. Someone else thought it might have been a goat, but it was not. It seemed too soft to be a goat, even though there are cashmere goats that are available. We also had water at the table too, and we drank water. I thought I was going to have to pay for the meat afterwards, but it turns out we didn't. That was taken care of for us, which was nice because I was fully prepared to pay for it. Drinking the meat, the best way to describe the taste of it is because it was cherry flavored, it was like drinking a less sweet slushy that wasn't frozen. It's not really a sugary rush, but it was pretty sweet. I ended up not finishing it. I only got like halfway. The whole thing was this big, right? I wasn't going to be able to finish it in one sitting. I typically don't finish drinks when I get them. Lunch was a buffet. They had 2 different soups. There was a carrot soup for the vegetarians and an Icelandic lamb soup, which I ended up going for that. There's also 4 different salads that were around and bread with butter and a bunch of toppings. So there were 2 different types of croutons, which I took, and there were also pumpkin seeds. So I decided to try that, and they actually weren't that bad. The texture was odd, but not as odd as I find nuts. It was an enjoyable meal. I did ask where the dessert was, and she said it was on the buffet, and it was not. I think there's some sort of miscommunication level there, but if my only complaint about the meal is I didn't get dessert, it was still a pretty good meal. If I have a bad meal, the complaint would not be we didn't get dessert. Yeah, we had lovely conversation during lunch as well, and after that we drove to a yarn shop. I was on the lookout for yarn to help me not lose yarn chicken on my sweater. But we didn't see any of that yarn there today, but there was a whole bunch of other Icelandic brands I would not see at home. I got to walk around. The moment we walked into the yarn store, there were actually buckets of roving and sheepskins in the entrance. The buckets of roving were amazing. It was filled with yarn, but it also had a bunch of Lopi sweaters. It turns out that the store is run by women who work there in the area. If I'm understanding them correctly, they're the only people who sell Lopis that are made with solely natural colors, like non-dyed yarn. But they also had some books and they had some kits. And the yarn was from people from the area, like dyed in the area and from sheep in the area. And they had a very good selection of stuff. I left with a lot of yarn and a lot of roving. It turns out that Kemba is the Icelandic word for roving. I also found out the Icelandic word for horse. Don't know how to pronounce it, but it's H-R-O-S-S. I do pay attention more to what horse is in other languages because Duolingo oddly mentions it all the time. It's like a running joke with my dad to go like, if I see a horse when I'm traveling, das Pferd, das Pferd. We had originally walked into the wrong shop. There were 2 shops side by side, and one of the shops was actually a ceramic shop, and we'd walked into it and we were told the yarn shop is actually around the way. We were like, okay, thanks for telling us. And we just left and went to the other shop. Although before we went, we saw that there's actually some pottery with wool intertwined with it, which was pretty cool use of mixed media. Then after the yarn shop, we drove to a woolen mill. It was a very quick drive. We talked with the owner of the mill. Her name is Hungu, I think, or Hildu. It's the Icelandic word for hidden. Because when she was born, she was a twin, and her parents weren't expecting twins, so she was hidden from them. And it's now the name of her brand, The Hidden Woman. She explained the process of how they process the yarn at the mill. They have sheep on the farm, they also have goats, and they collect the wool and they wash the wool. With the goats, they actually have to separate the wool from the inner coat from the outer coat, and she had the two different yarns there. The inner coat is very good for really soft things like underwear. The outer coat is a little bit rougher, but also still very soft. And she was passing around fiber and yarn the entire time, like the different yarn mixes that she has. She passed around this yarn that had rose and milk in it. I held solid milk today and it wasn't like rotty. They can actually make yarn from milk by changing some of the protein sequences or something like that. And it was impressive. With the long-haired goats, they don't shear goats. They have a very small window in which to get the fiber from the goats in which they're shedding their skin. Because if you go too early to shed the goats, they don't like it because you're hurting them. And if you wait too late to brush the goats for the fiber, the goats are uncomfortable in the hot weather. So if you hit the right time frame, they love it. And they love that you brush them and they'll let you like collect their hair, which is impressive. She also handed around a bag of the goats roving. And she's like, I call this the magic bag. And she's like, just put your hand inside the bag and feel how soft it is. And she passed it around and everyone's face was going like, oh, oh. I felt it. And when it was my turn, it felt exactly like the best polyester stuffing I've ever used. There's a particular kit that's made, I'm gonna put the company of the kit down there once I remember it, but their polyester stuffing is so soft, and that's what this goat roving felt like. And I was like, ooh, it's nice. And the lady there was like, it's more than nice. But yeah, we were just passing different yarns around. There was a yarn with seaweed. Apparently seaweed is very good if you have smelly feet because it's antibacterial. I do have seaweed yarn at home, and she explained her different yarn sizes. So she has the really thin fingering yarn, which is named after fairies, and then the thicker yarn, the next size is dwarves, and then there's one that's named after her, and then the biggest one is called trolls. It's like that thick. And then she showed us around the process of how her machines were made. So she showed like the spinning water thing for her wool so she can wash her wool without felting it. And then she showed us the drying racks, and then she separates it. And there's wool that's not good enough for spinning, but it still doesn't get wasted because it's good as fertilizer for the farm. And then she has two different carder machines. So the yarn goes through the carder machine and it turns it into a very pencil thin sliber. And then it goes from there to the spinning machine where it becomes 10 times as thin. Unlike the machine that I saw in Maine where you could spin and ply on the same machine, she had a separate machine for plying because some people do just buy the yarn as a one ply. From the plying, it goes to a steamer because yarn, if it develops a twist in it, it becomes unbalanced, and the steamer gets twists out of the yarn that's not supposed to be there. And then she had two separate winding stations. She had a winding station for hanks and a winding station for balls, which I'd never seen the winding station for balls before. She told us that this was actually attached to her house. Her husband actually gave up this part of the studio for her because his office used to be there, but then he ended up like not having enough space and moving his office there stuff to another place. And then he was like, do you want a place for your spinning machine? And she was like, yes, please. So that's where it worked. So I think we're also on the same property as her home. We went up to the store afterwards, and once again, I bought yarn. Most of the yarn she was selling was 100% Icelandic wool. She mentioned that most yarn stores that are buying the wool commercially want white sheep wool, and sometimes they won't pay for the wool if it's in mixed colors. Like if it has some brown in it or some gray and it's not just straight up white. Because if they want to get the same consistent color over and over again, they'll buy the white wool and then dye it gray or brown, even though sheep's already produce gray or brown wool. The wool might not be consistent from year to year because sheeps get older. And as sheeps get older, their health changes. They might have less sun, they might have more rain, and that all affects the wool. There's a hierarchy and age of the different types of wool that are available. So if you get like virgin wool, that's wool from a sheep that's a year old. The strongest wool that's available is from sheep that are between 2 to 4 years old. Wool that is, a sheep that is over 4 years old, they're senior citizens, they're elderly sheep, and their wool is no longer quite as strong, but it's still useful to make stuff for. The person running the shops mentioned that for the next couple of weeks she was going to be doing leader sheep, and she actually had some of that mixed yarn colors, and she says it's the best yarn because you get all sorts of wonderful colors from it. And she also mentioned that leader sheep are very wise. They are sometimes smarter. They can predict the weather. Apparently with leader sheep, they leave them in the barn and they open up the door of the barn, and farmers used to decide on whether to bring the sheep out to the field or not by how close the leader sheep was to the door. So if the leader sheep was willing to go out the door, they knew it was a good farm day. But if the leader sheep was like in the corner of the barn and not coming out, they knew to keep the sheep inside. Yeah, I got some nice wool from there. After there, we ended up making a stop at an Icelandic grocery store. Only one person went in. There was a toiletry item that was desperately needed. Thankfully, the person who needed it was able to find it. Throughout Iceland, I've been seeing like these bonus 10s and 20s. It's this pink pig on a yellow background. It's a grocery store. That's what that thing is. And after that, we went to go get cafe. My order caused a little bit of trouble for the person because the poor person was the only person working the cash registers, and she could not ring up cafe and other products on the same cash register, which seems very inconvenient for her, but I guess there's some sort of logistical logic behind it that is unknown to me. And I ended up drinking some hot chocolate on the swing. They had a swing hanging in the middle of a store, which was pretty cool. And it ended up causing me to be one of the last people on the bus. And the only reason I'm not the very last person on the bus was because 2 of the other people waited behind with me to make sure that we all weren't left behind. So very grateful for that. And then from there, we drove back along the cloudy Icelandic countryside back to the ranch. It ended up being like a very cloudy, overcast, rainy day today, which means it was actually the perfect day to not go horse riding. Hopefully the weather will be a little bit better tomorrow, so that way we can enjoy our last ride with the horses. After that, we had supper. We had a fish stew, which was like fish mashed in with mashed potatoes, and today's meal was a lot of unfamiliar things for me. It's not that those things didn't exist in America, it's just I was just not in the habit of eating them. There was eggplant and Brussels sprouts. There's a melon salad and rye bread. The rye bread was very sweet. Wasn't crazy about the eggplant or the Brussels sprouts, but I'm glad that I tried them. After that, we pretty much just spent the rest of the evening knitting. I did take a 15-minute break right between when we came back to the ranch and when we had supper because I just needed a moment to deal with some sensory overload. I ended up almost finishing my sweater while we're waiting. So this is my sweater. I still have to weave in the ends and I still have to graft the armholes, but that is it. I did the color work part. And I've tried it on and it mostly fits, even though I had to severely cut some rows because I was playing yarn chicken. I ended up having to make some critical decisions to win yarn chicken. This is how much blue I have left, and that is how much purple I had left. I have just enough to graft the underarms. But yeah, I ended up having to switch some of the colorwork instructions and reverse the colorworks instructions in order to get to a point where I felt like I could actually have enough yarn to finish the sweater because I knew I wasn't going to have enough blue. That's on me. But other people are starting to get to the point where they're attaching their yoke and to the sweater, and it's pretty cool. Lots of people were admiring my sweater today. But yeah, that was my pack-filled day. It was almost like I went on a little mini yarn crawl, yeah. Anyway, that was today's entertainment. Have a nice day.